Welcome to Outdrive, folks. I'm your host, Cliff Callis, and each week I'm bringing you actionable marketing insights you can apply to reach, connect with, and convert rural American consumers. Outdrive is powered by Callis, a full-service advertising agency with a focus on marketing rural America. Callis offers a wide range of integrated marketing services, including website development, search engine marketing, social media, video, and digital. We develop strategic and creative campaigns to build your brand and your business, and you can learn more about us at ecallis.com. Now join me in the front seat as we head out on the road to success. Let's go. Hey folks, welcome to Outdrive. We've got another great story to share with you today about life and work in rural America. You know, there are so many excellent organizations out here that are working to make life better for those in need. And many of them you've never even heard of for one reason or another. So it's always interesting to run across one you don't know about, but should. And that brings us to our guest today. Robin Phillips is the CEO of Child Care Aware of Missouri, a not-for-profit organization that helps working parents find child care throughout the state. This is a growing need, and Child Care Aware is building relationships and partnerships with other organizations to help fill this need. To do that, they're using a variety of public relations, social media, digital marketing, and grassroots efforts to tell their story and build awareness. Listen on and learn about this amazing organization, some of the challenges they face, and how they're growing with purpose for kids. Welcome to Outdrive, Robin.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I've been excited to meet you and have you on. I think we have a lot to talk about this morning. You have an organization which I want to hear more about, Child Care Aware of Missouri, and how you're making people aware of your organization. Certainly, this is one venue, this podcast, but I know you're doing some other things as well, and maybe some of the challenges that you and your organization face in your day-to-day operations. But before we go down any of those roads, let's start by having you tell our audience just a little bit about yourself.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for having me. I love sharing about the work that our organization does. It's all about children. That's our future. I've been in this space of what I refer to as childcare systems building for 25 years, which equates to a 25-year career in nonprofit management and leadership. I definitely like to learn from others. I like to be a lifelong learner. I don't, just because I've been doing this 25 years doesn't mean I have all the answers by any means, but we have a pretty sophisticated and knowledgeable team, and happy to play a role in different communities in our state to help employers understand how to address workforce recruitment and retention when it comes to the childcare topic. So thank you again for having me.
Well, you're welcome. So what is it about social services that really gets your passion going?
I'm not a spring chicken by any means. And so when I started my career in this field in my late 20s, I think it's common for many of us to kind of have those questions of like, is this what I'm supposed to do? What am I meant to do? You rely on different sources to find those answers. For me, that was my faith. And I just have had many God wink moments since my late 20s to validate that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I am supposed to be influencing systems, change, policy, thought, adding value so that we are all keeping our children, our youngest children in particular, in mind when it comes to quality of life and early childhood experiences for kids. I've always loved kids. That's my degrees in child and family development. Always had a passion for children. And then I think it evolved even more. Although I was married to my son's dad for 10 and a half years, he was in the Marine Corps. And so he was deployed a lot. So it was just common, myself and my son and support network. And so kind of, playing a single parent role, if you will, and wanted a career outside the home. And so what was I going to do about that? And thankfully at that time, I had access to military childcare, which is very different because Department of Defense really put an effort and focus on how they take care of their Marines and soldiers' families while they're deployed. So I was very lucky. And I think then later became a single parent of a young child who needed before and after school care, and just seeing what was there and what wasn't there and what I could afford and what I couldn't afford. I was a very different part of my career and, had to ask for help. And I know lots of people have to ask for help with things, and that's a hard thing to do sometimes. And so I think having those relatable experiences keeps me grounded and knowing that our kids deserve the best no matter where they come from, no matter where they live.
Every now and then, I get a guest like you that mentions God moments. And I always like to ask about those. When do those hit you? How do they come upon you?
Being calm and still and just seeking answers. I think many of us, and I definitely own this, I like to be in control of things, but I'm really not. I'm not the one who's in control. And as I've evolved in my career and life and just going through life and have dealt with a lot of things personally and professionally, your wisdom just evolves and you learn to lean on things and people and space differently. And so now I'm very intentional about, for me, asking God, like, am I doing the right thing? Is this where you want me to go? And just truly listening and seeing what responses I get. And, everybody's faith is different. But for me, I've had many of those moments, as I'm sure many of your listeners have as well. But that continues to guide me, especially in our work as a nonprofit organization. Over the last couple of years, we've gone through a lot of change, and I had to do some deep soul searching about how I was going to lead my team through that change. And so I relied on my faith and just those quiet talks with myself and my faith to find those answers. And I think just some validation that it's going to be hard, but I know I'm doing the right thing because it's for a different reason other than myself, always.
That is amazing insight. I appreciate you sharing that. When you said the word intentional, I think that's the word that really stood out to me there. Thank you again. So you get a great background for what you're doing. Tell us about Child Care Aware of Missouri.
So, Child Care Aware of Missouri was established in 1999, not by myself, it's not my organization, but by the founding executive director, because there was a need in our state and through federal law that systems needed to exist in every single state to help parents, working parents, find childcare. And from that point on, come about 2000, we started getting contracts to do, regional work and build into the childcare workforce through scholarships and higher education, which then led to some other statewide contracts, giving us a statewide footprint in serving both the childcare workforce in multiple ways and putting more tools in their toolbox, and also working parents and families and helping them find childcare and understand what to look for. And so we've been doing that work since the early 2000s. I joined the organization originally in 2004 as a program coordinator and was with the organization in multiple roles for about 10 and a half years. And there was a second executive director that had come in, and again, kind of some reflecting. There were some challenges with leadership, and I knew I needed to grow in different ways and I wasn't getting it. So I left the organization and went to do fundraising at a hospitality house called Haven House in St. Louis, which gave me experience I didn't know I needed and taught me things outside of state contracts and helped me really expand my network. And then again, another God wink moment brought me back to this organization in 2017 as the CEO. And I knew one day I wanted to lead this organization, but I knew that raising a child and trying to be a working mom and the travel, I just couldn't do it all and still be present for my son. And so I knew the time would present itself when the time was right. And it did in 2017. And so we continue to have that footprint and diversify funding. But it's basically building in, like I said, to that childcare workforce, putting more tools in their toolbox, helping families. And really in the last couple of years have shifted that focus to employers, particularly employers of small businesses and in rural communities across Missouri. Finding childcare in rural parts of Missouri, it's a national challenge. So it's not just Missouri, it's everybody's facing that. We do some other things too with supporting childcare businesses and helping them understand, accounting practices and budgeting and reading P&L statements. And people running childcare businesses don't typically have MBAs or an accounting background. And then we do some advocacy work in Jefferson City, educating state department heads and lawmakers on what we're hearing and seeing on the ground or from our partners on the ground and where some things need to change. Missouri has made a lot of progress, but we have a lot of work to do when it comes to the child care crisis.
Is the child care crisis growing? Is it getting bigger and bigger all the time?
You could define crisis in a number of ways. Certainly during the pandemic, and our state was making local decisions on who could operate and who was essential and so on and so forth. And really, COVID just peeled back all the layers of the onion on access to childcare and the cost of childcare. And now you fast forward to post pandemic or whatever we call it now, and things haven't gotten better. But unfortunately, in Missouri, there was an unintended consequence with a system that was rolled out by the state of Missouri to reimburse child care providers who serve children on subsidy. And there was a significant hiccup in that system. And a lot of our child care providers in our state were not being paid in a timely fashion, let alone sometimes they were 6, 8, 9 months, a year behind on getting reimbursed, causing a lot of childcare programs to close. And childcare is still an industry and has to have their own workforce. So we go to the grocery store, we go to restaurants, and we have to wait a little bit longer. We have to do self-checkout because they're having challenges finding workforce. Well, guess what? So is childcare, because childcare is not babysitting, it's a profession, yet the business model only allows those interacting and educating our youngest children to be at minimum wage jobs because there's no funding formula behind that. And so I'd say it's gotten worse when you start dissecting it from different angles. It's certainly not getting better. And we have a lot of employers telling us, and we hear through the Missouri Chamber and other avenues and partners we have that, employers, particularly small employers, are continually challenged with workforce recruitment and retention. And childcare is a part of that. So that's where we've spent a lot of our focus over the last couple of years, is really trying to connect dots and how this plays into economic development. I'm not an economic person. However, I've tried to educate myself and surround myself with many from across our state to learn and to listen. But I do know it boils down to quality of life in our communities, particularly our smaller communities. And it's not just about having access to a health clinic or a library or great K through 12 schools. It's also about, where do our youngest children have access to early childhood experiences, and what does that quality look like so people will stay and raise their families?
Yeah, absolutely. And bottom line, economic development is about creating jobs and for people, and people have children. And so that childcare has to be a component of that. Are you challenged with workforce recruitment, retention in your own organization?
Yeah, in our own organization, for sure. We're the nonprofit sector, so salaries, we can be as sophisticated as we want, do the compensation studies, and try to be as competitive as we can. But bottom line is, you're stewarding private and public dollars. And so you want to be responsible for those and how you build into salaries. It's what everybody's kind of been experiencing from what I'm hearing, is there's a lot of ghosting and people not showing up for just the call interview to do the initial meet and greet, and making sure we're kind of on the same page before we invest a lot more time. What I see is, and I have 5 generations here, so I've had to certainly acclimate myself to how, and my son's 28, right? So how everybody thinks a little bit differently. But the nonprofit sector does not typically provide jobs for entry-level people starting at $50,000 or $60,000 a year. That would be a luxury. And yet people have those expectations, because when you look at our economy and what we're spending at the grocery store and everything else, that's kind of where the math works out. So I think sometimes that poses a challenge. I think, though, the beauty in our organization is we have 18 employees here, including myself. And I did the math the other day, actually, for a grant we were working on. And I would say we're right at about half of those employees have been here 6 years or longer. Our turnover rate is very low. But we do a lot to build in, because we're small, we do a lot to focus on our values, our workplace culture, our collaboration. Anybody can question me as the CEO. Anybody can raise anything they want answers to. And if I can answer it, I will. I like to be transparent. And I think that just builds a community and builds trust and rapport. And having relationships with each one of my staff, whether they're a direct report or not, is important, because I know they have something else going on at home, and work, isn't the end all be all. So yeah, I don't think we're like most other companies. I'm still a company over here. I'm running a small business. We just happen to have a tax exempt status. And I have to think about workforce recruitment and retention and benefits and what keeps people here. We're actually in the process of doing an anonymous employee engagement survey, just to make sure that somebody hasn't been hesitant to bring something up. And is there something else we can address?
Well, it must be a great place to work.
I hope so.
Yeah, if you're experiencing low turnover, because you're in an industry that's very much purpose driven, and you must be doing a good job of allowing people to fulfill their purpose and their mission in life. So I think that says a lot about your organization.
Yeah, thank you. And I think a lot of that too comes from my own diving into personal growth and personal development. I'm a certified Maxwell leader, and thank God for that, because that was some pretty significant touch points in my life that I got that teaching and those interactions from John Maxwell and others on his team, and continue to stay engaged and have sent a lot of my leadership team through that certification as well, so that we think differently and have a growth mindset. And then we have common language when we're trying to tackle something hard. And I think that, I give a lot of credit to all of us here working on those things too.
Well, you mentioned John Maxwell. Do you have a favorite book or a favorite philosophy that comes out of that?
Well, it's the law of the lid. And, we steward a lot of government money, more government money than any other kind of money. And that can be state government money. And we just locked on a contract for the first time with the city of St. Louis. They're investing in scholarships for the childcare workforce. But there's a lot of bureaucracy that comes with stewarding government funding. And there's not always a lot of entrepreneurial or innovative thinking. At least that's been my experience. I'm not saying that's true of every government entity or worker, but that's been my experience. And I often use this with my own team, or when we're trying to grow through a challenging time, that when something or someone is putting a lid on you, that's as far as you're going to grow. So if I put that lid on myself as the CEO of this organization, my team's never going to work past that lid. I want my team to work past that lid and excel beyond me, so that they're being lifted up in this organization. I can't do this work by myself. I have to have a team, and I really would rather be underneath them, lifting them up. And you can't do that when there's a lid. And sometimes that lid is harder to navigate because of bureaucracy and politics. But I'm also someone by nature, I don't like to be told no. By nature, I'm also a rule follower, though. My father was in sales his entire life, and he taught me a lot about negotiation and understanding and asking questions. And so I will always be that person that asks the hard questions to try to get to a different answer, especially when I know that's going to benefit the people we serve.
Your questions are so powerful. And then listening to hear what the answer is, because you really can help people when you dig in and find out what it is that really drives them, what they need.
That was probably our biggest lesson from COVID. We have a very knowledgeable, passionate team here, and we're like, oh, well, let's go get this grant and let's create this, and childcare educators are going to want this. Well, guess what? We learned that they don't want everything that we're over here making and doing. And so the biggest lesson we got from COVID was, you know what? We're just going to quiet down a minute, and we're going to step back and kind of, are we going to punt? What are we going to do here? We're going to reassess who we are and what we're doing. And we're going to be better listeners of those we serve first and foremost. And I think reflecting on that and keeping that in the forefront of my mind, even though that's 6 years old now from 5 years, my point being is I have become a better listener. I'm encouraging my staff to become better listeners of those that we serve and better question askers versus just running and doing it, because we're very capable of that, but that's not always what everybody wants.
Great quote from Hamilton: talk less, smile more. One of my favorites. You mentioned growth earlier. Talk a little bit about the ways that you and your organization are growing.
So when you are a nonprofit organization, you can never be dependent upon one source of funding or that grant or contract you had for 2 years, or in this particular instance, I'm going to share with you a contract we held for 24 years with the state. And that contract was competitive from about 2014 on. So about every 4 years it came out for bid. And so we bid on that last about 2 years ago when it was up. And we did not win the competitive bid. It wasn't because of anything we did wrong. They don't really tell you, was your price too high? They just didn't choose us. And you're kind of like, okay, like, how am I going to lead my team through this kind of roller coaster of emotions? Because it was a bit of a grieving period of, we weren't going to be serving families, particularly families in need with their childcare needs. So now what? Are we just going to run this department over here and that's it? And I'm like, absolutely not. That is absolutely not what we're going to do. But I myself had to work through the emotional roller coaster of change and go through some of the anger and dip into the space of, okay, Lord, what am I going to do now? Like, I want to keep my team. How are we going to persevere through this significant change and financial adjustment? And fast forward, I had already been, this is when you look back and you're like, oh, so that's why all that was happening, right? Because it was to line up with what we're doing right now. You just don't know that in the moment. And so all these conversations, I will always give Dr. Carolyn Chrisman credit for opening the door to economic development and economic development leaders. I will continue to give her that credit, and I continue to be in conversations with her. I did the first presentation I had ever done at the MEDC conference at the lake, gosh, probably going on 2.5 years ago. And that just perpetuated all these conversations with other economic developers and chambers, and getting into smaller communities across Missouri to help them understand how childcare, workforce development, and economic development tie together. And what that did was it birthed these new services we launched a little over a year ago called Childcare Keeps Missouri Working. We branded it. We hired a marketing firm. We asked the board to reinvest some of our assets to launch it. And basically, it does a couple of things. It provides a much more needed type of referral service for all families, and that's actually navigating the system. It's been a long time since I was a new parent, but let me tell you, even with the degree that I had, I was very overwhelmed by, like, where am I going to leave my son and trust these people, and what questions do I ask? So it's a very overwhelming process. And so this concierge service came about to better help the parents so they felt more powerful and informed when they made their decision. And then the other half of that was geared towards employers and doing some smaller contracts of either helping them assess needs in their community, how they could offer childcare as a benefit. And it doesn't have to just be on-site childcare. There's like 10 more things employers can do, but they don't know what those are. And so helping people understand that. But working through that was a big emotional change that I had to, like, put a lot of faith and effort into leading my team through. And thankfully, I think because of our culture, they had an easier time, not saying it was easy, but an easier time of trusting the process, that I wasn't giving up and I was going to get us to the other side of this. And here we are. And we have a 5-year business plan, and we're about 1.5 years into it. And we're making small steps, and really progress is progress. So that's the biggest thing that our organization has gone through in the last couple of years, was pivoting from something we had done for so long and kind of creating a startup inside of a 25-year-old organization.
That's got to be very gratifying to see that working.
It's gratifying when you see your team having, collaborative conversations, and people are on the same page, and people might not quite know how to get there, but we're all rowing in the same direction. That makes a huge difference in how you work through storms and get to the other side of those storms. And it's not because any one of us had all the answers. We just trusted one another and just dug in and did it. And it's not easy by any means.
But what a great learning experience.
Oh, yeah, totally. Even from the get-go, I'm like, this will not roll out smoothly. We're going to have fails. Like, it's okay. We're just going to own them and we're going to learn from that. Craig Rochelle is another guy I follow. He leads Global Leadership Summit, and he gave a presentation, and we use this term all the time inside the office, and it's called GETMO, good enough to move on. And so we're like, okay, we just need to get it to a GETMO. There's a YouTube teaching on it if you want to Google that, Craig Rochelle. But it's like having that common language, we all know what that means. We're like, okay, it can't be 100% perfect. Get it to a GETMO, let's launch it and let's lean into it and see what works and what's not. And then we come back and we tweak it and keep refining it. You know, you're never going to roll it out perfectly. You have to learn from your mess ups. They're not intentional, but they're going to happen.
Absolutely. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because sometimes speed is a lot better than perfection. And you can, as you said, perfect over time, but get out there and get into the marketplace and assess the situation and then adapt to that. You mentioned earlier that you're providing services statewide. From an operational standpoint, how are you doing that? How do you serve in the entire state? That seems like a pretty big challenge.
Yeah, it is, but I think we do a pretty good job of it. Again, we're not perfect, we're human, but it boils down to having regional and local partners help us do some of the work. And so we offer trainings on a statewide basis, or perhaps have training dollars from a grant from a local foundation. And so how do we execute on that? We're bringing on a contracted trainer who's from that area or nearby that area, who's in direct connection with our team here. So they're like a team member, but it's a short-term project. But they're the ones that have the boots on the ground and have the relationships with the providers. You know, we can't be everywhere, and we don't need to be everywhere. We need to have other faces out there that people are familiar with, and they're just bringing childcare aware of Missouri's vision and opportunities to them. And so I think that that's key. We are always seeking different opportunities. And when they're statewide like that, we are adamant that we have partners to do this work because one, I don't want to run all that out of one office here in St. Louis. That's too much. And two, that doesn't best serve the people. You need to get them connected to local faces and people who understand different nuances of that community. And I think that's super important to do that.
Agreed. So I'm sitting here thinking, I think now's a good time if there's somebody out there that's listening that thinks they may have partnership opportunity in their mind with you, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, they can give me a direct dial call. So my direct line to me is 314-754-1605. I'll say that again, 314-754-1605. Or you can email me directly at Robin, ROBIN, at mochildcareaware.org.
Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm sitting here thinking about communicating a message to a statewide audience. We do this a lot because many of our clients sort of have Missouri in their target. And it may be all kinds of different types of audiences, from consumers to their businesses, organizations. You know, that's a challenge. What are you doing from a communication standpoint to tell your story, to get your message out statewide?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think I would just expand on that a little bit to say we are connected to a national organization with boots on the ground in DC on federal policies. And so I'm also a recent member of the National Small Business Association Leadership Council. So connecting with a lot of other small businesses and the challenges they face and how we can influence national policy, but that can tie back into state policy, something that maybe could mirror something or connect you to somebody else. I think we definitely use social media channels. Our most popular are Facebook and LinkedIn. People would say we probably need to use X. I'm not even used to saying that. It's like you only have so much bandwidth for some of that and some of the noise that comes through those platforms. And so we do outsource some work to help us stay present on social media, tracking our SEO and how people are getting to our website using Google Analytics and things like that. And then recently bringing on a contracted partners to help us with public relations and have really leveled up our press release output, going to engage in some op-ed articles now that the session has started, and we're focused on Missouri still having, 75-ish counties that are childcare deserts. It can fluctuate plus or minus 2 or 3 each month, just depending on a lot of variables. And I think, too, having a more intentional presence under the dome and making more intentional relationships with key members of the legislature and making sure they know we're an expert that they can lean on for data and other childcare information. I'm a recent graduate of Missouri leadership from the Missouri Chamber, and certainly extended my network quite a bit that way. And then just my own personal, I'm on LinkedIn as well, and I like to use that platform to connect with other like-minded folks who want to solve problems and have generative conversations and thought leadership, but particularly on this topic. And then we do I don't like the term newsletter. It feels so old school to me. We call it a partner publication. That one's more geared towards community leaders and childcare professionals. We do have a separate newsletter we call Childcare Keeps Missouri Working, that anyone who's an employer, an HR leader, an economic developer can get on that newsletter. It is a very light read. We're not sending you 10 minutes of content to read. It's less than 5, but it just might touch on something that resonates with people in that moment.
Well, it sounds like you have a very thorough, well-rounded, multi-pronged effort going on, and it sounds like you're moving in exactly the right direction.
Yeah, thank you. In some cases, we've even gone back to snail mail because the childcare population the workforce is so inundated and overwhelmed by emails that we've gone back to snail mail in some cases to recruit for some of our scholarship programs, and that's proven to be quite effective. So,
We're finding that too. People just don't get the mail like they used to, and they like it. It's almost a nice surprise when it shows up on their desk or at home.
right. Oh, what's this thing on hot pink or yellow paper? It's not a bill. It's something else. So I'll open it up and see what it is.
Exactly. You mentioned analytics earlier. Any takeaways from the data and analytics that you're collecting?
I'm not the best person to ask that. I have a team of people who give me a dashboard and inform me. But I think for us, we have competitors in the space of work that we do, and it's important to understand the context of that competition. I mean, it just is what it is. It's co-opetition. So you still have to remain present and see where you fit in, and making sure we're using the right buzzwords that people who are searching for us, and we have new people searching for us, right? Because of these expanded relationships in economic development space and workforce development space and chamber space. And so just staying on top and in tune with that to show that we are directing people back to the website and which of our pages are getting the most hits, so that we keep those sophisticated and up to date. But as a nonprofit, keeping your website up to date can be a very heavy lift, and you have limited resources to do it. So we try our best.
Very important, though. Those search engines like dynamic, changing, beneficial, useful websites. So keep focused on that. Before we jump over and talk just a little bit about your perspective about rural America, which is one of the focus of our podcast, I have one question for you. Here's my curveball question. What's the one thing you want people to remember about Child Care Aware of Missouri?
That we're making a difference for children in the first 2,000 days. That's just it. If people are unaware, a child's brain is 85% developed by the time they're age 3. 90% developed by the time they're age 5. So no matter where that child is spending time, whoever they're with, those interactions and those moments are firing all those synapses. And so where they're at and who they're exposed to and what they're learning is key to their future.
That's a good reminder right there. You have some life changes coming up that you were telling me about. You've been living near the city or in the city, and you're moving out more towards the country. How do you unwind? How do you relax? How do you recreate?
Well, I call it recalibrating. Being outside, being in nature, I like to flower garden. I'm not a vegetable gardener. My grandpa tried to teach me all that as a kid, and I'm like, I think I'm just good at digging up the potatoes and breaking the beans, but I'm not sure I'm ever going to get to that point. But I have a lot of respect for people who do. I think, just for me, I'm an introvert when I leave work. I am on all the time when I'm at the office or, interacting or leading. And so for me to recharge, I need to be in quiet space. And so sometimes that's indoors, sometimes that's outside. I like to, believe it or not, Silver Dollar City was voted like the number one place, right, for holidays and such. But I love roller coasters. If I need an adrenaline rush, that's where you'll find me. And sometimes you just need to scream from frustrations and navigating what we navigate with funding, which is a lot of politics. And sometimes you just got to let it out. So you'll find me there. I love to bake. And right now I'm helping my son plan his wedding, which is coming up in right at 60 days.
Ooh, exciting times ahead.
And then I have my own shortly thereafter in October. So, there's a lot of life change and a lot of transition with moving and such this calendar year. And I am bound and determined nothing's going to steal that joy from me, no matter how political the funding gets. It just, those are moments. We all have lives outside of work and life is short. And so I will treasure those moments.
Well, congratulations. And I know there are good times ahead. As we start to close, and I want you to think a little bit about rural America and the phrase rural America. What does it mean to you when you hear it?
Well, I haven't always lived in St. Louis, and I have lived in smaller. I lived in a military community of 100,000 civilians and 100,000, Marines and Marine families, and that was a big adjustment. I spent time as a kid in Clinton, Missouri. I spent time in Higginsville, Missouri. And so I think understanding that there are lots of commonalities and there are a lot of differentiators. And I think my run with Missouri leadership this last year took us to a lot of smaller communities. Sure, we toured Kansas City and St. Louis, but to go to Perryville or even, I don't consider Springfield rural, but it is a different mindset than St. Louis. Spending time in Jefferson City and some of these, St. Joe, and seeing how the communities are coming together and setting aside their own, the agencies, the university heads, whomever it is, are setting aside their own desires and egos, if you will, and figuring out how to come together to best serve the community with innovation and life experiences and community experiences. And to see that happening in different communities around our state was very humbling and a good reminder that if we all just took a minute and put our heads together and put our own agendas to the side, we could probably accomplish a whole heck of a lot. That just doesn't happen everywhere. I have a lot of respect for that kind of thought leadership and movement in smaller communities. I was invited to attend the U.S. Rural Development Conference back in the fall out in DC, and they were taking a specific look and focus at childcare in rural parts of America. And part of that experience led me to be a part of a hearing at the White House and to hear some of the states that are making such tremendous strides in how to serve working families and working moms and people wanting to get apprenticeships, and how do they do that and go back to school if they can't access childcare or housing, transportation. There's lots of challenges. And to just hear what other communities and other states are doing was like, oh God, that's so incredible. And oh my God, we have a lot of work to do. But so I'm not giving up. That was great to hear from other people from other states too, to understand how they're navigating some of these challenges.
That is great perspective. Robin, I've sure enjoyed visiting with you this morning. What else would you like to share with our Outdrive audience that you think they might find interesting or maybe even inspiring?
Well, actually, I think I'd like to ask you a question, and I'd be curious to know if any of your listeners have brought up the different workforce and recruitment challenges they're experiencing as small business owners. And has childcare been a hot topic for any of them that you're aware of?
It is a hot topic, and we've had several different economic developers on the program over the past 5 years, from more of a local regional organization to a statewide organization. And workforce development is like number one challenge statewide. And then childcare just plays into that. And I know on a local level, or I guess regional level, I sit on a couple of economic development boards. And there are organizations that are trying to figure it out from small to large. and looking at different pretty innovative ways of partnering to try to provide 24-hour care, because that's what the need is. You have industries that are working around the clock, and those kids have to be looked out for. So it is a challenge. I think the partnership approach makes a lot of sense. So I encourage you to continue to do that. I know you will. That's part of your DNA. And I think hopefully we keep the ball in front of us and we'll get it figured out.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because, a lot of people may understand or assume childcare is only happening in small to medium-sized, large centers and are licensed. And I'm always going to be a proponent of licensed childcare versus unregulated. I mean, for safety and quality, really. Some of that needs to flex a little bit. I get it. But for safety and quality of interactions, I'm a proponent of licensed family childcare. And man, do they play a role in smaller communities and especially shift work, whether it's for manufacturing, whether it's for first responders, medical personnel who have those odd hour shifts or overnight shifts. And we can be a connector between the licensed family childcare supply and employers to get introductions happening and conversations happening. And we're working on a project with another statewide entity. Some of your listeners may have heard, it's called Kids Win Missouri. And we're working on piloting in some of our smaller communities across Missouri, a childcare exchange model that would address. It's kind of a cost share model built off of something they launched in Michigan successfully, where the employer, the employee, and the third leg is either state funding or maybe it's philanthropic money or it's local money, but that third leg is part of the cost share to help people get back to work and have childcare and also help in paying for that. And so this legislative session will be important to see if we can get some funding allocated for that, which is different than tax credits for employers. Those are great too, but they're not the panacea. It's not a cure-all. It's another opportunity. And there's lots of ways to slice this pie. And so I think if any of your listeners want to know how to partner differently or innovatively or need those connections, we can absolutely be that connector to those family childcare businesses.
Perfect. Well, you're doing great things. We appreciate you, and we wish you all the luck and encouragement going forward.
Well, thank you. And thank you again for the opportunity to share who we are and what we do. It's avenues like this that help us get the word out even more. It boils down to our kids. They're our future. They're going to be taking care of me one day. And I want to make sure they all have equal and fair opportunities for learning and growing. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Folks, thanks for listening to Outdrive. I hope you've enjoyed our visit today with Robin Phillips, CEO of Childcare Aware of Missouri. If you like the episode, go out and give us a nice rating and review, and come back again next week, and I'll take you down the roads of rural America where it's heaven on earth.
Thanks for taking a ride with us on Outdrive. This episode is complete, so head on over to ecalis.com for more insight you can apply to help drive your business growth. And be sure to sign up for our free monthly e-letter, Outthink, for even more helpful content about marketing to rural America. Have a great day and keep on driving.